I think that's why we love the handshake, because, there's people who have these intense transcendent experiences. They have no context for it, right? Let's say they don't have a spiritual tradition that they follow. There's nothing to hold it for them.
Sure.
So if we can show them, hey, you're actually not alone. This is super common. You don't necessarily have a mental illness. There's, all these things that we know about it. It helps ground people in that experience. And then when you look at the science, I can talk till I'm blue in the face about this study, that study, this study, but if someone hasn't had the direct experience, it's often hard for them to believe it or to take it in. So I think the two of those together, that we call this handshake, is really the sweet spot that can empower us to move forward with these taboos and rigidness around these topics.
Welcome to another installment of Behind Greatness by Inspire. It's Luciano here as your host. Thanks for joining us once again this week. I want to remind you, as is my habit, I want to remind the listener, please subscribe, share with your family and friends if you haven't. If you feel so inclined to donate to the cause, we're always open. We are a not-for-profit and a registered charity. We all do this for fun, and there's no income made here. We do this because we want to learn and we want to share what we learn with the rest of the world. So we're actively doing that. So by all means, just visit our website at behindgreatness.org, and you can see very easily where you can, as well as the library of all the conversations that we've had with people all around the world. And we're adding to our library every week. And this week we're adding a fascinating individual. Her name is Helané Wahbeh. She is director of research at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And we've talked about ions here in the past, and we're going to keep talking about it. She's an adjunct assistant professor at the Department of Neurology at Oregon Health and Science University. And she's also the president of the Parapsychological Association. She's done many things, including published and spoken internationally about her studies on complementary and alternative medicine, mind-body experience, extended human capabilities or capacities, maybe one and the same. I want to spend some time on that. Stress, post-traumatic stress disorder, relationships to physiology, health and healing. And she's especially known for her research around and noetic approach to channeling. You can check out one of her most recent books, The Science of Channeling, Why You Should Trust Your Intuition and Embrace the Force That Connects Us All. Helané, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you. Great to be with you. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
No worries. I practiced it all morning. So Dean Rayden, a thank you to him. He's your colleague, obviously, and he's been on the program. He was on the program very recently, about a month ago. A chief scientist at IONS, and we did talk a lot about IONS on the episode with him. So why don't we start that way with you, because we did talk about it in more detail the last time you and I chatted. Just for the listener's sake, what is the Institute of Noetic Sciences? What is IONS?
So IONS has a fantastic birth story, if you will. Edgar Mitchell was an Apollo 14 astronaut, and he went to the moon and was the sixth person to walk on the moon. He did his job there, and on his way home, he had this incredible transcendent experience where he felt part of everything, the stars, the moon, the earth, and that it was all a part of him as well. And this was instigated by his capsule kind of rotating 360 degrees, and he would see the earth, the sun, the moon, the stars, etc. Now, being an engineer, he'd never experienced this before, very enmeshed in linear logical thought. And so this oneness transcendent experience just blew him away. And when he came back to Earth, he committed to start the Institute of Noetic Sciences to look at what is this interconnectedness. and to look at it in various ways, and through research and also direct experience. Now, that was in 1973, and amazingly, IONS is turning 50 years old next year. And IONS over the last 50 years has had many different initiatives, programs, etc. But currently, we're really about this noetic handshake between science and direct experience.
Noetic comes from the Greek word gnosis.
That's right. Gnosis, or inner knowing. So it's looking into this inner wisdom that we all have. What is it? How does it work? How can it help us? How can we get into that state more often, more easily?
I listened to you on another interview where you said you didn't even know that parapsychology, this is before you started working at IONS, I believe, that was a thing. And that it's a science that's been studied for over 150 years.
Formally, yes.
Formally. Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
So the naive, stupid question I ask for you, or I ask of you, is why the hell do we not know this?
That's a great question. So when you look throughout human history, humans have been having these noetic, intuitive, psychic, extended human capacities. We can put whatever label we want on them, but humans have been having this experience for as long as we have recorded these things. And parapsychology is a field that formally arose to study them about 150 years ago. And what's interesting about these phenomenon is that they are in the realm of the immaterial, right? Spirit, soul, non-physical, non-local. Again, we put all these terms to things that aren't material or physical. And our current scientific paradigm is materialism, that all there is that exists is what we can see, touch, measure, etc. And there is a great taboo, if you will, for looking at things that aren't material, because in this model of how things work, immaterial things don't exist. So it's impossible for me to have a sense of what you're thinking right now, Luciano, because according to the material worldview, my consciousness is stuck in my brain, inside my head. Mm-hmm. And I can't tune in and sense what you're feeling, what you're thinking. But we see this over and over again in daily life and laboratory settings where actually people can sense what's going on in other people's bodies when they're separated by distance, when there's no way that their traditional five senses could actually do that. So there's something else going on. So back to your question, why don't we know about this? I think part of it is the current paradigm doesn't leave space for it. Another piece is our very brutal, intense human history, where people who had these abilities were killed, essentially. And there was a, very systematic destruction of humans who expressed these abilities, from the Inquisition, from...
Yeah, so not only killed, but also captured, tortured, and made an example of. Yes.
Exactly. So, there is a very real fear around coming out about these experiences, or has been, if you will. Mm-hmm. And it's been hidden. So the other third reason, I think, is because today's, general human mind in the West, I should qualify, may be afraid of our capacities, of our incredible human potential. Because think about it. What if I could just very easily read your mind, right? And there's all these things that you're thinking that you want to keep private. So the idea that telepathy or mind-to-mind communication is a real thing is really frightening to some people because they don't want others in their mind. So there's like this privacy security thing. Or you look at psychokinesis or mind over matter. What if I just intended to push a button of a nuclear bomb, right? Like that's incredibly scary to think about. So those are three major reasons why I think parapsychology is not front and center in everyone's mind. That being said, I really do believe it's shifting quite a bit, especially through the last few years with COVID.
So before I ask you on where it's shifting, I have a quick comment on hiding or not studying this front and center, or not having this as part of the public discourse historically. I was going to say the U.S. government, but not just the U.S. government. Governments who have a stake in military defense systems have been involved, are involved in this kind of tapping into human capacity. And so we've learned that through Russell Targ. Like we keep mentioning Russell Targ on this podcast because that one discussion completely blew me away, but blew the doors open to our reality. The U.S. government, to use them as an example, but the Russian government, and there are several others, of course, that if you do your reading on it, use what we already know about ourselves, meaning that we can exist and we can see through time and space or beyond time and space for defense purposes, military purposes. But there is a science there. And Dean Rayden, your colleague, actually worked in that program for 1 year before he realized that there's science here that's being ignored. I'm out because I want to study this. So going back to material versus non-material, you've said, and I think you've just alluded to it, we're in a post-material world, or we're coming into a post-material world. Where do you see the evidence of that? You said since COVID. How do you see it manifested?
I think it has been slowly building, and COVID, I think, accelerated it for the general public. Now, the way I envision it now is we're kind of straddling two paradigms, like they're both existing and we have one foot in one and one in the other. Now, materialism has taught us quite a bit. So I'm not saying throw it out. Just take what we learned from it and understand that it doesn't actually explain everything. And so can we be open and curious about phenomena we experience around us, not write it off as impossible, and explore how it works, who can do it, what are the boundaries of its expression, etc.
You mentioned in another discussion that I was listening to that you were trying to publish a paper about this, and you were told what you were studying was completely impossible, and you were not allowed to write about it or discuss it. And there were going to be energies put forth. You were threatened with energies put forth to stop you from ever publishing. Do I remember that correctly?
Yes. We did a study, and it was actually such a benign study. We surveyed over 1,000 meditators from around the world, and we were curious about any psychic experiences that they may have. We just had a few questions like, have you felt connected to your teacher in a way that, was beyond your five senses? Did you have any kind of non-physical experiences, any sense of timelessness or boundlessness, etc.? So we got these survey results. We did this nice paper. It was a huge collaborative effort by expert meditation researchers from around the world. And we talk about busting open meditation research, so it's not so mechanistically focused. And we submitted this to a mainstream journal, and we got this scathing letter back from the editor saying, you are not allowed to ask these research questions, because this research question of, do meditators have these experiences? These experiences are impossible. So it's like designing a study around the question of if pigs fly, right? So He was
Wow.
essentially saying, you are wasting everyone's time, energy, money, etc. And so not only am I blocking this paper, but I'm actively working to block all research of this type, because you're not allowed to ask these research questions because the phenomena are impossible. So that was an intense response. And it literally was like a 2.5, 3-page scathing full of emotion and anger and passion. So, usually we just get a rejection. No, we're not interested. But this person was very invested in blocking this work for whatever reason. And I can project in those instances that there's a lot of fear there. Like, why is he so passionate and emotional about this? There's some fear going on. And, science is a process. You can ask whatever research question you want and use this scientific method process to attempt to answer it. So, in my opinion, I don't think there really is any taboo research question. And, I get the point of you're wasting people's time, energy, money, etc. But to me, this curiosity, going back to this open and curious, I'm an incredibly curious person. This is why I'm in this field. And I think we want to know, how does it work? What are its limits? All these questions. So
it's a no-brainer for me.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you want to know what you don't know?
Right.
Okay. So so let's go back to you. You're a scientist, you're a researcher, and you're a channeler. Explain for the listener, including me, because I actually still don't know the difference between a channeler and a medium, or a channeler and a psychic. You actively channel. What does that mean, and what is the difference with the other two, as I mentioned?
Yes, I use a really broad definition of this word channeling. And so I describe it as this process of accessing information and energy from beyond our conventional notions of time and space. And that can appear expressive or receptive. Now, that's a big mouthful, right? So it is a broad umbrella term that encompasses a wide spectrum of human experiences, ranging from intuition or gut hunches that just about anyone could say they've experienced in their life, all the way to trance-channeling or mediumship, which are more rare, but people also experience. And then things like telling the future, or what I mentioned, telepathy, psychokinesis, somewhere in the middle there. Now, you mentioned terms. One of my greatest frustrations when I first started in this field were all the different terms and how each person had a different meaning for what that term was. So in general, this is generally speaking, when you hear the word medium, it is referring to someone who believes that they can communicate with deceased people, and that they do that in a mental way. So they may go into an altered state. They may believe they're communicating with the spirit of a deceased person. The deceased person either gives them symbols or says things or shows things, and then they translate that to the person in front of them. So they get messages, they translate it. So that's what's normally understood as a medium. What's generally understood as a psychic isn't necessarily believing they're communicating to deceased people. They're gathering information, receiving information from beyond space and time, or beyond the physical, if you will, but it's not necessarily from a deceased person. Now, some psychics call themselves psychic mediums, etc. So it's very, very messy. And then there's another category. Many people, when they think of the term channeling, they think of trance channelers. Now, trance channeling, I consider a smaller slice of the larger channeling umbrella. And trance channelers believe that their body acts as a vehicle for a non-physical being to communicate through them. So like the medium is hearing messages and translating it. The trance channeler goes into an altered state, and then they just start talking. So the non-physical being supposedly actually uses their body to communicate directly. So there's no translation, if you will. The spirit is communicating directly from the trance channeler.
And so when we say trance, we mean TRANCE, not trans, TRANS.
That's correct.
Okay, I want to be sure. So you trance channel.
So yes, sorry, you asked me about my personal experience. So I've always been very, very sensitive as a child, emotions, feeling others' emotions, energies in the room, etc. As I grew older in a spiritualist type family growing up, my mom's side of the family was very aligned with spiritualist tradition, and developed my own abilities to channel in various ways. It shows up for me in my body. I get goosebumps. I see symbols, or I get downloads where I just, will receive all this information about someone or something that I couldn't possibly know otherwise. And more recently, I learned how to trance channel. Now, trance channeling runs in my family. So my mother is a trance channeler, my uncle, my grandmother was. And I learned about a protocol from Patricio Tresoldi, who's a colleague of mine in Italy, who used hypnosis to teach people how to trance channel. And I was already at IONS. I said, oh, this is a wonderful opportunity for me to see if I can do it. And I thought it would really help inform my research on trance channelers as well, because that was a research interest of mine. So now I can trance channel if I choose to. I don't do sessions or do it professionally or anything. I just can do it if I choose to for myself.
And how do you feel? So actually, two questions. Why do you do it? So why do you take the space to do this? Because presumably you let another interdimensional being take over your body as a vessel for the communication, right? And number two, how do you feel, and what do you feel after whatever session you do is over?
Yes. The rationale for any channeling, and I'm a huge proponent of this for everyone, is it allows us to tap into greater wisdom, inner wisdom. We're bombarded all the time by information all around us. And many people are really suffering with overwhelm, with confusion, with depression, sadness, etc. And we see over and over again in the studies that look at it is when you channel, in quotes, in whatever way that looks for you, even if it's just taking a few minutes a day to get quiet and still and go within to see where you're at, that it improves people's quality of life, it improves meaning, it supports them in making decisions, and they just are happier, healthier, etc. So that's the reason for why I channel also. And I've personally found that, since I have integrated channeling into my life in a very conscious way every day, incorporating it in, my life is incredibly easeful. Opportunities unfold. I don't freak out over decisions. I can make decisions much more easily. I'm not saying I'm completely stress-free and perfect, right? But my life and the path of my life has unfolded in a dramatically more easeful way. And I feel so grateful for that. Now, when I say I do my daily channeling, I don't trance channel every day. And my mother has been a great support for me around that because she is a channeler. And often if I'm going to do trance channeling, it's with her when she's, we're having a one-on-one channeling session. And it's often, there's a decision point in our lives, or, the world right now, to get some insight from our, what we believe is our guides, our guide team, non-physical beings who are beneficent, who are supportive and loving and want to support us on our path. And that's a very spiritualist type belief system. And as a Helene, the person, I can say that, that is my worldview. I believe that, right? With my scientist hat on, it's a little different, but.
Well, I don't know. Does it need to be different?
Does it need to be different? Well, the scientific process is all about reducing bias, right? And being able to observe what is without intense filters. Now we're learning in science, and especially in the psychology field, that I cannot separate my filter from the study. Like, it is virtually impossible to remove the expectations and beliefs of the researcher. We're seeing that more and more clearly. So I can't remove it completely, but I aim to be as neutral as possible when I go into a study around this.
So I asked you that question, and again, it comes out of a place of childish exploration, because I'm not a scientist. But with your definition of the Noetic Handshake, it's one that tries to marry science and experience. And much of this experience, like what you've described, what Dina's described, and Russell Targ has described, and many others actually on this podcast, it can't be proven, but we know that it exists. We know that it's there. Because we experience it, and that's why I say, well, can you take the science? Can you really separate them? Because maybe science needs to be something more. But who the hell am I?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And I'll give some qualifications to that. So, I feel like psi phenomenon, things that we can see in the lab in daily life are very, very well evidenced, right? Where it gets tricky is around proving, in quotes, and I don't like using that word, right? But that's what people look for, is definitive proof that there are non-physical beings. Definitive proof that when our body dies, that our consciousness continues. So that's where, I feel like I'm a little split, right? So my personal belief is, yes, our consciousness survives physical death. Yes, there's multidimensional non-physical beings. Scientist hat is, with the current tools we have today, I don't feel like we have definitively proven, in quotes, that they exist. There's this loophole, if you will, that it could be generated by living beings, that I'm somehow, doing mind over matter and creating this apparition, or I'm, manifesting it in some other way. And, you see in my book, I have this whole chapter on what is the source. Everyone wants to know, what is the source? What is the source? What is the source? And ultimately, if we're all part of the same thing and we're all one, I don't feel that it really matters. That what's more important is the content and how it supports us in our lives. So if I believe that my spiritual guide is telling me, this really inspiring, empowering messages, and that inspires me to create, to make choices that helps me in my life, whether that's coming from Helané or whether it's coming from a non-physical being, doesn't matter, because it's ultimately supporting me. And some people may not like that, but I don't feel like we have the tools today to definitively know. And I see a lot of energy in my field and around. It's like, oh, all this fighting, whether it's real or not real. It's like, let's just set it aside for now and focus on how we can use it to actually support us, to improve our lives, to help us individually and humanity. Humanity needs a ton of help right now.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that's I think, in my own personal opinion, it's a good first step, because if we're getting downloads, and when I say we, because you've also said we should all come out of the channeling closet because you believe that we all have the capacity.
Right.
And so I want to get to that too. So let's assume I agree with you right now for the sake of this comment. If we all believe that we can receive downloads and that we can receive information to make our lives better, well, maybe we're receiving information to access more than just having our current 3D lives better, because our 3D lives are limited. And if we believe that there are interdimensional beings and there are downloads coming from the greater consciousness, then there has to be something that exists that is more, I use the word important, but more permanent and maybe more profound than we can possibly sense from our five senses. And maybe our 3D existence is not what's important.
Yes. I mean, yes.
And I don't mean this religiously at all, like with any religious context.
Right. But it goes right back to it, right? But is it religion or is it spirituality? And then, you come to this piece of science and spirituality and how the two were, I think, artificially separated. And, it's like completely taboo to bring up spirituality, but it's just like this polarity of materialism and non-material, right? Science is supposed to be separate from spirituality. But if our consciousness is this non-material, non-local thing, then we have to incorporate those in some way.
We've had two other people on the podcast in particular, more than two, but in particular, who are actively, and I think you might know them, Marjorie Willicott and Federico Fagin. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So you know them. Yeah, of
I
course.
know both of them. Yes.
Yeah. You run in the same circles. But that's when I first started to learn here on the podcast. We first started to learn about scientists who were investing their time, energy, and with Federico, their money to motivate other scientists to study the non-material as well, not exclusively, as well.
I love those stories. I mean, Federico's story is amazing, right? I mean, he's this Silicon Valley computer scientist maker, right? And he has
touch
this
our phones. We touch our phones. We drag our fingers on a screen and we expect it to work because of him 40, That's 50 years ago. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So, like Edgar Mitchell, it's incredible when these very logical, linear thinking people have these transcendent experiences and you see them and they are just, it's ineffable, the experience of feeling that transcendent oneness state. And there's nothing I feel like that felt sense, that an inner, just complete knowingness that I am more than this body, that I am interconnected with everything.
I think it's amazing and confusing with the same intensity to be broken open by the fact that you are not, by the belief that you are not just your body. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to explore, I think.
Yeah. So I think that's why we love the handshake, because, there's people who have these intense transcendent experiences. They have no context for it, right? Let's say they don't have a spiritual tradition that they follow. There's nothing to hold it for them. Sure. So if we can show them, hey, you're actually not alone. This is super common. You don't necessarily have a mental illness. There's, all these things that we know about it. It helps ground people in that experience. And then when you look at the science, I can talk till I'm blue in the face about this study, that study, this study. But if someone hasn't had the direct experience, it's often hard for them to believe it or to take it in. So I think the two of those together that we call this handshake is really the sweet spot that can empower us to move forward with these taboos and rigidness around these topics.
Question for you, because you talk about beneficent beings. In your experience, have you ever met malevolent beings or come across?
Yes, great question. So for any listener who is interested in embarking on this work, not just for self-promotion, but either look at my book or other sources around this about how to do it properly, right? So there's often, if you look at many different cultures and traditions who talk about communication with the non-physical world, there is almost always comments about protection, about setting intention, about creating a sacred ritual space to do it properly. So I personally do not believe in devils or like intensely malicious spirits. I have recently done some interesting reading on possession cases, and those are just so exceedingly rare. And more often than not, if you experience a non-physical being who has kind of denser energy, it's more out of ignorance rather than intentful maliciousness. Is this making any sense?
You lost me on ignorance. Ignorance on the part of the being that you come across?
Yes, the being.
Okay, so elaborate on that piece. What does that mean?
So there's this whole belief around, what happens when we die, right? So let's dive into the spiritualist type thinking here. When we die, our consciousness leaves our body and then moves on towards the light to non-physical realms. That's like the normal path, right? Now, if someone dies and either they're afraid of going to hell, it's happened suddenly in a car accident, they don't realize they're died, various other reasons why they don't move on, they get stuck. And there's various terms for this stuck non-physical being. The most common I know of is called earthbound spirit, right? So these non-physical beings are stuck hovering around Earth. They're dense energetically, and they can affect humans and people around them. And they often don't realize that they're even dead. So they're in this non-physical plane that isn't moved on, but isn't alive, kind of in this limbo state. And again, there's so many different traditions that describe this with slight nuanced differences. So that's what I mean by ignorant. So for example, this whole belief of either spirit attachment or being affected by these earthbound spirits, they can affect someone negatively, but not on purpose. They just affect people because their energies are dense. For example, let's say someone was an alcoholic and they had very, very negative mental processes. They, were very angry, shameful, full of guilt, anger, etc. When they pass, if they get stuck, that energy doesn't go away, right? So, and a sensitive human who's living can be energetically affected by that deceased alcoholic who's full of anger and hatred and shame and guilt. And so part of why I think this work is so important is to support people to use tools and take steps to be aware of that potentiality and help shift it for themselves. Because some emotional sensitives may be super depressed and it's not even their depression or their emotion. I know this is like a whole can of
No,
worms.
but it's a beautiful can of worms.
I just want to say, if people want to dive more deeply into this topic, we just did a wonderful free webinar where I had clinicians, psychiatrists, et cetera, talking about this phenomenon of earthbound spirits and how it can help influence mental health, and various study ideas we're interested in for the future around that. So that's on our website, and you can go more deeply into that.
That's on the IONS website, right?
That's right.
Okay. And we'll in the show notes, we'll put all the links to your information as well. So
Okay, great.
listeners will know for sure. A couple more questions here, because I know we're running out of time, but I want to make sure we get these in. How, in 30 seconds, how do you suggest we start coming out of the channeling closet?
I believe the first step is to practice it yourself and to set aside time, even if it's just a few minutes a day, to go within. People can choose whatever way resonates with them. I personally, I'm a meditator, so I love meditating and I go into a meditative state. Other people like being in nature. Other people like body movement in some way. Just ask yourself, what would most inspire and motivate me to have a internally quiet, still moment, right? And then practice that every day, even if it's just a few minutes. And then you can start playing with asking yourself questions. It's easiest to start with a yes or no. Should I eat, oatmeal for breakfast? Yes or no? Like, is that in the highest and best of my body? I'm just giving some
Sure.
silly example.
Yeah.
Start with decisions that are not going to shake your world in a major way. It's like weightlifting, right? You start with the smallest weights and you build up. And set the intention before you begin that you want to open up your channeling ability in an easeful, safe, and supported way. And you don't need to know how that intention is going to come to fruition. Just clearly state it. So that's more than 30 seconds, but that's a quick and dirty cliff notes for beginning a channeling practice.
I didn't mean it when I said 30 seconds, because I was making fun of the fact that we don't have a lot of time. So
sure.
Because this is something I want to explore more. Also personally, not just on the podcast. So thank you. Where do you exist after you die? What do you believe?
That's a great question. I personally believe that my consciousness will survive my physical death, and that I will likely be met by family and who have already passed and my spiritual guides. And from the various channeling sessions, it seems like they're busy. They're doing things. They have assignments. They teach. They support. They, travel to different planets, realms, etc. And so, to me, it feels like it's going to be a next amazing adventure, and my human mind can only begin to imagine what that's going to look like.
Do you believe that you'll be continuing that as the being formerly known as Helané, or a conglomeration of other formal people into a grander idea of consciousness?
I think that I will still maintain some individuation. I don't think at this point in my development that I'm going to dissolve into the all that is, that I will have some individuation, but that will be much, much vaster than my Helané personality as it is right now.
The last question. What is greatness to you?
I think greatness is fully stepping into all that we can be, and to be unafraid, to have courage, the courage to feel the fear and do it anyway, to shine, and to bring our fullness to every situation in our lives from a place of love and compassion and joy.
Well, thank you. Bringing your fullness. It's the first time I've ever heard that. I like it. I like it. I don't think it's an accident that your name has roots in a definition of light or ray of light. So thank you for shining a little bit here for us on some of the work that you've done and what you are. Thank you, Helané.
Luciano. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.
Hey, it's Enrico Colantoni here, actor, director, and dedicated napper. Like what you heard today, there's more to come. Make sure to subscribe to Behind Greatness and learn about our live events at inspirenorth.com. You'll also find links to our social media right on our website, so be sure to give us a like and follow. Until next time, stay inspired.